the fun part about being in AI right now, if you're honest, is you acknowledge you don't know, right?
Right.
And to your point, people think of leadership as the people who have the clear, crystal, idea of what's going to happen. And how many times, Elon Musk has been wildly wrong about his predictions, and anybody who gives you a strong confidence prediction about the future is almost certainly wrong. And the worst part is, if they're really confident, they won't realize it until it's too late.
Welcome. My name is Pete Steinberg. This is the series that goes along with the book Leadership Shock. We're going to go a little bit off-piste here. We're going to spend a little bit of time talking about leadership, but in a different way that isn't linked to the authentic leadership model in the book, although I think we'll find connections. And that's because I have a very special guest. It's actually the first ever return guest on Leadership Shock. I'm bringing back Adam Russell, a longtime colleague and friend. And we're going to talk about the way you should think in the AI era, which I think is fascinating for leaders and probably fascinating for society. So, Adam, welcome to the Leadership Shock podcast.
Thanks, Pete. I didn't realize this is my second chance. I won't disappoint.
So, I'm not sure we talked about this, but you have this weird background as someone in AI. You're a cultural anthropologist. Can you tell us can you give us some of your AI credentials as a cultural anthropologist? That doesn't seem to be the background that many people are from in the AI world.
That's a fair observation. Although the numbers are growing, and I'll tell you why in a moment. Pretty nonlinear biography in some sense. But one might almost say an explorer biography. I know we can unpack.
We'll get there.
Yeah, we'll
unpack it. Teaser. We call that a teaser, I think.
Foreshadowing.
Yeah.
So I got my degree from Oxford University, DPhil in social anthropology. Played a lot of rugby. Came back to the United States, and I ended up with no really deliberate intention to do this, but I ended up working for a guy named Andy Marshall, who was the director of the Office of Net Assessment. They called him in Department of Defense Yoda. He was appointed by the president, President Nixon, and every president since. And he retired, I think, at the age of 92. I mean, that's sort of influence he had. He cut his own teeth, by the way, also wrestling with a new technology. So in the early days of the Cold War, we had these new weapons, these nuclear weapons, and it wasn't clear like what our strategy should be. How do we play this out? How do we do this and navigate the narrow corridor between defeatism and apocalypse? And so he actually, to his credit, has tremendous respect and value for anthropologists. So he brought me in initially into doing some of the national security work, focus on this idea of like, how is emerging technology going to change geopolitical competition? And to do that from a net assessment perspective, you have to understand, first of all, how your competitors think, but you also have to spend a lot of time trying to understand how you think. So he thinks the anthropological mindset's sort of designed to do that. That led, and I can't tell you why, I could come up with a story, it wouldn't be true. That led to my becoming a program manager at some point for IARPA, which is called the Intelligence Advanced Research Projects Activity. They're modeled on DARPA, and the goal is to do sort of high-risk, high-payoff research. So take bets, right? Take big bets that have a minimal chance of working, but if they do, it's big if true kind of thing. Even in those early days, it was apparent to me that the social sciences were going to be deeply impacted by artificial intelligence. I mean, we're talking back in 2010, well before the GPTs, but even the machine learning efforts and the tools that were coming online, like social sciences was going to be changed. Fast forward, I ended up at DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, where at that point, AI was much more mature, and I started launching programs that were meant to sort of stimulate this intersection between social sciences and I'll call it machine learning because that's really what it is, but nowadays would be referred to as artificial intelligence, which means, back to the question of my creds, which means I had to be able to grasp the technology and its implications fast enough to be able to go toe-to-toe with essentially world experts, though I myself would never claim to have the technical chops to code up, for example, the transformer architecture deal. I don't write in Python, for example. It's an open question whether that's even necessary. Fast forward 5 years from now, whether that's a skill set we're
whether coding's a skill that's important.
Right. And it just sort of speaks back to this idea of it was just apparent that AI was going to change everything. So the programs were designed to sort of ask questions about how AI might impact social sciences, but also ultimately, I think it was pretty clear to everybody that AI was going to become sort of a giant social science experiment. So this question of what can we do with AI, but what is AI going to do to us? Anyway, so I fast forward, ended up at University of Maryland, helped stand up another ARPA because I believe in that model. We can unpack that a little bit. I think the ARPA model is itself a sort of explorer organization. And then having worked with the Information Sciences Institute at the University of Southern California, they have a 50-year pedigree. Actually, some of the early real revolutionary stuff in AI came out of ISI, to include two of the authors on the transformer paper that led to essentially GPTs, right, that we're dealing with right now, came out of ISI. They reached out to me. I think they also saw the same thing of like, hey, this is going to be a social science AI, epic. So they brought me on to become the division director of the AI division over there, and I've been there for about a year and a half.
And it's so, for our listeners and viewers, this is going to be what it's going to like. I'm going to ask Adam a very simple question, and he will give a very complex answer. So that's kind of how this is going to work. But this has been a really interesting discussion that we've had, really, I think, over the probably last year and a half about mindsets and the way people think. And Adam, you and I both get the privilege of talking to partners at KPMG about performance and high performance. And I think those discussions that you've had with KPMG partners and the follow-on discussions that we've had has opened up our thinking into these mindsets. So let's go back to sort of like that early discussion that we had around performance, because yes, you worked in AI at DARPA, but you also worked in performance. One of your goals was to help individuals and teams perform more effectively. So talk to me about the evolution about how we have thought about performance over the years, and maybe we can then begin to dig in about how we think that impacts the way you should think about complex, difficult issues.
Yeah, fair. Throughout that entire sort of narrative of my biography, it is true that human performance has been there the entire time, in part because the role of emerging technology is ultimately the impact on humans, right? And humans are the ones that are competing, and the human weapon systems, they refer to it, war fighters, but also our decision makers. Yeah. So I don't think you can do AI without having to engage with the human. Very early on, we were looking at things like human performance, how these things might affect the ability to change and augment people's capabilities to make better decisions. It's more than just sort of stronger, faster, higher. It's the military qualities and capabilities that really matter. Just making people stronger is not in itself a competitive advantage. But so here's the thing with an anthropologist, the mindset is always you get into a place and the first thing you want to do is sort of understand what's happening, right? How are people thinking? What's the mental model that people share? And so I've had, I think, probably the privilege to look at the evolution of mental models, shared mental models around issues of human performance. And I very crudely generalize that as the early days, human performance, what I call first wave thinking, was very much focused on this idea of, for example, finding faster. How do we make people faster? And we focus on a very specific particular capability or a narrow skill set, and we look to sort of improve that. And the reason I call that first wave is because it became quite apparent, obviously, that the human system is very complex, and so you can't affect one thing without necessarily affecting the others. So one of the things we first started pushing when I got into this area was this thing of human performance optimization. And optimization takes a first sort of second wave mindset, which is the notion that you have to think about all these things, right? All the gears that fit together necessarily interact. And so if you really want to optimize human performance, you have to think like an engineer. You have to think about how these systems interact, and augmenting one could actually have a detrimental effect on others. And that's true both at an individual level, but also the team level. So we heard from a number of high-performing teams that one of the most disruptive things they get was the natural performer. The superhero shows up and is awesome on paper and just kind of destroys the team dynamic. And so you have to think, from that mindset. But that has, in my observation, the best thinking has then evolved further to this sort of third wave mindset, which is, experts are sort of the first wave, engineers are the second wave. Those are still important. But the third wave folks, I began to realize, took this much more sort of exploratory mentality, this mindset, even for human performance. So they've begun to build systems that are rather than being designed to come to a particular outcome, they're designed to work with individuals and teams in a very exploratory way. So we're going to try stuff, and if it works, great, and we're going to keep going. But if it doesn't, we're going to adjust. And so what I began to see is that the people were really building feedback systems, because there was a sort of acknowledgement from the beginning of, we don't know how this is going to go. You could just sort of point back to DoD. There's a common term in DoD called OODA, which stands for, it's an OODA loop. It stands for Observe, Orient, Decide, and Act. It was created by Air Force Colonel John Boyd. And the notion is that if I have a faster OODA loop, if I can observe, orient, decide, and act faster than you, I'll win. And it was originally focused on aerial combat. That's true, but the problem is, if you're looking at a complex system, you just observe. You won't learn anything, right?
Right.
So the next, I think, third wave evolution of that is this thing called ASDA, which the Australians have adapted, which is act, sense, decide, and adapt. Like, you have to get into the system to sort of just perturb it a little bit to better understand, how's it working, right? How do we get to what right looks like? And you can't, the whole premise of ASDA is, don't act if you can't sense. If you don't have a feedback loop, you're sort of lost, right? In that sense. So, and I see that even at the human performance level, at the individual, at the team, and really at the best enterprise levels, they have this sort of ASDA third wave mentality of learning. And I've actually begun to use this term LQ, or learning quotient, as opposed to intelligence quotient, which is for what you know about the world, and still very important. The learning quotient, I think, is really this issue of who's got the better feedback loop, who's running the more experiments, who's learning faster.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting, because if we take this to leaders, and as you go through those different mindsets, it's really about the problem or situation you're trying to handle, right? So the idea of an expert, the experts know things, but what they know is relatively constrained. Mm-hmm. And so if the challenge that they're being faced is also relatively constrained, they probably can come up with an answer, right? That's the idea, right? But the engineer recognizes, actually, I can't, as experts in this environment, can't identify the answers. We need to come up with systems and processes to find out what the answer is. Mm-hmm. And I think the explorer is in this complexity, and this definition of complexity, where things are interacting in ways that you can't know. It's interesting, because you talked about the individual, team, and organization, and to me, when I think about leadership, I think about that's part of people's leadership journey. Sort of, I'm a director, I can be an expert. Most of what I do sits within my function. Mm-hmm. I'm a vice president. Most of what I do fits in the function. It touches other parts, but I probably need to be an engineer, need to come up with strategies to deal with this. Mm-hmm. But when I get to the C-suite, the complexity is huge. I actually don't know. And this is very much an organization. And Adam, you and I do work in things like trust and culture development in organizations. Because we're talking about humans and the way they interact, we don't know what's going to happen. And yet there's a requirement, or it feels like there's a requirement as you go along that journey, for you to be more certain and be more confident that you know the solution. In other words, the CEO is supposed to know the solution.
Yeah.
So talk to me a little bit about this explorer mindset, and do we think a CEO in society can have an explorer mindset? Like, is that allowed, or would that tank the stock price?
I can't speak to that, right? Explorer would say, I don't know, but
right. Okay, good job. Role modeling.
But we have hypotheses, right? You got to have some guesses. So actually, I'm sort of facing a bit of this dilemma myself, even as a division director, relatively smaller company compared to KPMG and others, but still being asked to develop strategy in a landscape that's as dynamic as artificial intelligence.
Right. So you're, what's your strategy for AI? You're like, I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow in AI.
That's right.
How are we supposed to have a strategy when we don't know what's going to happen? I mean, it's a really great, and by the way, that's like things like COVID and supply chain issues and talent issues are exactly the things that leaders are facing. So you're like, they don't know what's going to happen tomorrow either.
I think the fun part about being in AI right now, if you're honest, is you acknowledge you don't know, right?
Right, right.
And to your point, people think of leadership as the people who have the clear, crystal, idea of what's going to happen. And how many times, Elon Musk has been wildly wrong about his predictions, and anybody who gives
Right.
you a strong confidence prediction about the future is almost certainly wrong. And the worst part is, if they're really confident, they won't realize it until it's too late, right? Because they'll
Right.
be so. So, from my perspective, I think what leaders increasingly need are really strong visions, right? We have to have an idea of what right looks like. We want to know where we're headed ultimately, but strategy, where traditionally we think of strategy as doing that, right? Well, we're going to go to X, so we're going to do A, B, C, D, and here's our path. I think strategy now is much more about our strategy to get to what right looks like is going to be an explorer strategy. We are going to approach this through the key elements of feedback and experimentation and diversity of signals, noting that our strategy will necessarily include us changing path, right? Strategy is not setting a target and just going straight there. It's, in fact, perhaps from my own biography, it's going to be this sort of nonlinear path, but the strategy will never change, and what right looks like will never change. And the goal is to adjust on the fly to keep going towards that vision.
Yeah, the analogy I use with clients is I say, hey, you see the mountain that you want to get to, and in front of you is this jungle. So you can always look up and see the mountain, but you're going to be walking down different paths in this jungle, and maybe your team is walking down different paths, and some of them say, hey, I found another way through, and the other paths that you like, it is exactly that kind of analogy, which is like, I can always look up and see the mountain, so I can always have directionally an idea of where I'm going to go, but I'm not sure which path. And what's interesting, I think, in strategy is that people do want, like, they want, hey, what are our metrics? What are our objectives? What are we going to get there? Like, we do a lot of work in account strategy, and people are like, well, what are we actually going to do to get there? And people want to get into those tangible spaces, and the ability to stay in that area of ambiguity, like that place of I don't know, is really, really hard in society when the way I'm measured is actually what I do this quarter or this year, but actually what I do this quarter and this year might be going down the wrong path in the jungle.
Totally.
And so I think that's so,
think
you and
about.
I've had. Go ahead.
No, I'm just going to say, think about. So I do a lot of adventure racing where you have teams and you have targets and on the map, and that's you need to get to a specific target. You know where you're going, but there are many different choices of where you go. And in my experience, the person who is most confident is the one who gets you in the most trouble. And so think about from a leader though, having a leader who's willing to say, the person that we least expect might actually have the insight that we need to leverage, which necessarily means you have to acknowledge, I'm wrong. I was running an experiment,
and I don't know everything,
and I
don't know everything, right? And I think, I think that's it's that willingness of being vulnerable that I don't know. I think that has to be the first step for an explorer. I think anyone that is confident that they know something is an expert and maybe an engineer. Someone who says, I've got like a hypothesis, but I need to go test it, is an explorer. So I think that might be a really interesting, when we get into like, how do you choose an explorer? How do you identify an explorer?
Yeah.
Their lack of confidence is a piece. And the other thing that you just mentioned that I think is really important is this concept of diversity. Because we don't know what we're going to be faced, what we need is a broad set of experiences. People on the team need to all feel like they can have a voice. A lot of the things that we've kind of been hearing over the last 5-10 years about psychological safety and diversity really comes to play if you're an explorer leader, because you want people that aren't like you want people that have different experiences than you, all because you don't know if they're going to be useful or
not. Yeah. And my hypothesis is that if you have a leader who is able to conceptually convey that and actually say, this is the strategy, right? And build confidence in the strategy rather than build confidence in me as an individual decision maker, you're separating that. And now I'm following you because I believe the conceptual toolkit you have is actually going to be effective, rather than I'm following you because you seem really confident that that's the way to go. And I'm not convinced that's the way to do it. Now, and I would say, you can even build that mentality into an organization. So my time at the ARPAs, for example, the whole principle of an ARPA is, in fact, you are testing hypotheses. And the best program managers are the ones who learn quickly that certain hypotheses are not proving to be true, but others are proving to be more true than they thought, if that's if
Right.
that's the question, right? And so they can divert and be agile to go after, go in that direction. And the people who sign up for a DARPA program as performers, the best PMs will convey that. Like, everybody knows what they're getting into, and so they have faith in the program manager, not because they're going to tell you how it's going to go, but they're going to tell you, okay, this is how we're going to go there, right? This is the sort of mechanism. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think this is interesting, because this is sort of like the bombshell that I'll drop for our audience, is that you and I are writing a book on third wave thinking, and in particular AI. And I think, but I think what's really interesting about it for us, we don't like we're honest that we don't know what some of these answers are, and some of the really tricky questions are like, how do you measure an explorer mindset? Like, you've talked about LQ, which I think is really interesting, right? Which is like your willingness to learn, but that needs to be your willingness to do things that fail or might fail, your willingness to take risks. Like it's just, how do you, like I said, how do you reward someone who spent a year doing the wrong thing, but has learned a lot?
Yeah.
Right. So they didn't, and I think this gets to this strategy piece that's really interesting, because it feels like the strategy is the way we're defining it is very differently. We're defining it with like the toolkit that you have, the mindset that you bring. We're not defining it with like clear objectives, clear metrics, and clear actions. Our strategy is how we're going to go on the journey versus what the journey is. And I think you and I have been talking about this. Like, the metric piece, I think, is a really interesting piece that I don't think we've like cracked yet.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I'm thinking hard about, where I said the AI division, I'm promoting sort of what I call the 4 C's. There's competence, there's character, connection. Right? Competence is you have to be an expert in some sense. Character is where we're looking for that kind of explorer mentality to some sense, right? You're willing to learn, you're willing to be wrong. Right. The connection is, again, this notion of diversity. Like, who are you connecting to? How far are you connecting? Because that will improve your access to diversity. But then finally, this other one is contributions. And that's the one I'm wrestling with right now, because how can I measure the degree to which you have contributed to our making progress, or at least contributed to our strategy that we believe will help us make the right decisions to get us to where we want to go. And that's really hard, as you point out. I mean, how do you measure someone who's created the psychological safety that allows lots of different people to speak up, and the quote unquote Chicken Little turns out to be right because they saw something nobody else saw, and you created an environment where they were able to speak up. We were able to adapt quickly based on that. That's really hard to quantify.
Yeah.
I don't think it's impossible, but it's really hard. And I would love to be able to measure something like an organization's learning quotient, LQ.
Yeah, I mean, I think this learning quotient is interesting. I think like how you would measure that, but I just, it all comes back to this challenge that we have. We talked about the confident leader, and then we took another societal challenge we have is how we approach failure. And failure being a bad thing, and people not wanting to fail. I mean, some of those, and which goes all the way back to sort of like how we learn as a kid and what we value, right? You and I both have young kids, and they're both getting, and our kids are getting into competitive sports, and the first question we ask is, "Did you win?"
Yeah.
When the first question you should ask is, what did you learn?
What did you learn? Absolutely.
What did you learn?
Yeah,
right?
Yeah.
Or did you have fun? But like society is like, and this is, we both have sports backgrounds, and this is what I tell when I do my talks. I stand up as a former Olympic and World Cup coach, and I say sport is a really bad analogy for business because our metrics are wrong. Yeah. Right. So you look at the Buffalo Bills, they went to 4 Super Bowls in a row, and everyone calls them losers. And I'm like, dude, going to 4 Super Bowls in a row is amazing.
Second best
that's amazing. Yeah, but so it's just, I think our metrics are wrong. But so I think we've touched on this explorer thing. I want to get in a little bit to like why we think that's important right now, and in particular why we think AI is gonna require a different mindset, and maybe even more positively enable more people to become explorers. So can you share a little bit about why you think now is the time with, generative AI now, being, not ubiquitous, but it's going to be ubiquitous pretty soon. And why that means that we need more explorers, and why leaders need to have more of an explorer mindset.
I mean, I can philosophize and think about it. I don't want to claim that I have any strong confidence that this is right.
So this is the challenge that we're going to have on this podcast, right? Because you and I, like, we need to be explorers. So we have to constantly preface everything with, like, we don't know what the answer is, and people are going to leave the podcast be like, okay, so what I learned is I don't know.
Those guys don't know.
This is the challenge, anyway. So you're prefacing it with you're an explorer, so you don't know that this is the right answer.
That's right. Just a quick point about your notion of failure. I agree. I've written actually about this notion of intelligible failure, like failing and learning from it. I do think we just need like a new term for it, because failure is sort of poisoned, and there's got to be sense. I do think the term learning is actually encapsulates this, if we can sort of promote that. And I'm seeing, as you said, in my own kids, we're actually playing together as a family Legend of Zelda, where, as a video game character, you die all the time. And my kids are getting to the point where they're excited because every time we die, we learn something, right? We try a different strategy, we do something else. So I'm just saying, like, there are lots of opportunities to sort of inculcate, hopefully, this mentality. All right. So why now? I mean, you could argue that some of the best thinkers we've had in the past, in fact, were explorers already, that there were people who, were really smart in terms of taking a risk, learning from failure, and refactoring, using as many experiments and diverse signals as they could. But I think now it really is critical for a couple of reasons. The emergence of AI, I think, has surprised essentially probably everybody. I mean, even the folks designing it are sort of wowed by the impact of scaling. Just make it bigger, and suddenly you can do these things we didn't anticipate. So we don't know what AI is going to look like. That alone requires us to sort of be explorers. It is not the case, as we hear from people, that they're designing a perfect process to get us to artificial general intelligence, whatever that really actually means. So that's one. The second is, we actually don't know what AI is going to allow us to do. The expert mentality to AI is, I'm going to take AI and I'm going to do what I already do, just a little bit better. The engineer mentality to AI is this notion of, well, I can bring AI and I can optimize certain efficiencies, or I can improve the outcomes of the process. The explorer, I think, mentality is going to be really powerful, because it's going to allow us to do entirely different things, right? We're going to be able to maybe radically even change how we do our workflows today, how we communicate in organizations. It may even change what an organization looks like, to be honest. I mean, there are genuinely very sane, intelligent people who are talking about, actually, there's a great article recently about the first $1 million bot, right? Essentially, an AI agent that was able to accumulate $1 million in Bitcoin, or at least using the cryptocurrency. It's just this amazing explosion of experimentation that's occurring. That's going to require explorer mentality, both to understand and keep up with the AI externalities, where AI is going, how it's evolving, what the regulatory landscape looks like, many I think of the safety issues, but also the AI internalities. So how is AI going to impact even your own organization and improve, ideally, the performance? Here's an example of the internality. It is entirely possible that the use of AI tools could radically improve individual productivity, and actually at the enterprise level have negative impacts. It is entirely possible that I could be using tools that will improve my ability to produce specific outcomes, but as a result, it reduces my connection to other folks, right? I may need other people in the company less, which at an enterprise level is not a good thing, right? That actually will impact that. So I think we are, and again, that's a hypothesis, although there's some evidence in that with work being done. This is the point: is you have to have an explorer mentality to begin to build in place the feedback mechanisms to give you insights into what is it actually doing, right? How is this impacting us? So here's another interesting area of discussion. In the future of AI, is it more important to be an expert, because that is what will make you most valuable, because we're building these sort of general AI systems, or is it more important to be a generalist, because with AI, we're going to have 10,000 PhDs in our pockets, right? It's essentially going to make experts not redundant, but it will provide expertise. And what we're actually going to need is sort of the explorer mentality at the top to leverage that expertise more effectively.
Yeah, I just to push on that idea a little bit. So one thing is that in my space around, like, people development and leadership development, when I talked about expert, engineer, and explorer, that's actually like a developmental pathway, right? Like you get good in your business by becoming an expert in something, and then you get challenged with more complicated problems and systems, so you become an engineer, and then you get challenged with complex systems, and so you have to take the explorer mindset. And it's sort of like I said, director, VP, C-suite. That's kind of like a vertical leadership development process. If you don't have to be an expert, and I think we're seeing it like with like an interesting discussion with places like KPMG in professional services or in law firms. Like if AI can do the job of an associate, how do you develop a senior associate? Because you used to develop it by doing that job, but now AI can do it. So how do you actually develop this senior associate, or how do you develop the manager? How do you like now you have to train them on things that they learn by doing, and now you have to train them. And so I think and that's a really tangible way that you need to think. And I think the challenge that we have is like the answer to that is we don't know, right? We don't know because we don't know. Like, do you need a manager? Like, what are you actually going to need in the future, and what are those skills? So my question for you is, if we look at vertical leadership development and we look at like expert, engineer, and explorer as being a sort of developmental pathway, can you like be like, we're just going to develop explorers? Like can you become an explorer without having been an expert and an engineer?
I think probably, but I don't want to say that's necessarily a good thing, right? I think there is an element to which, Google recently acknowledged that 25% of their code is being generated by AI. Think about the amount of code that Google produces. That's actually not a trivial number. But they're still having people look at that code, right? There's still some value to having humans in the loop. I think this is where I go back to this notion of co-intelligence. And the idea that AI will replace people, I think, may be the wrong way of thinking about this. And where I sit at the AI division, our vision really is what I call symbiotic AI, is looking at a way that AI both makes us better, and I can unpack that a little bit, but that through the interaction, it also gets better for our own purposes and how we want to use it at enterprise level. So I think you could actually, you might be able to have your cake and eat it too, right? In this again sort of vision, where through interaction with AI, by thinking of AI essentially as part of your system rather than just a tool, can you create situations in which people both develop expertise, but also at the same time are developing explorer mentality or explorer mindset because they're using this tool, right? Because they realize they can now begin to verge and be, as we know in innovation research, transgressive. They can transgress what would have been normally both disciplinary silos in the academic world, but also, probably business silos in some sense. So this goes back to my original motto, right? If you're not confused, you're not thinking clearly. Like this, there is a huge degree of confusion there. But I think I would never make an expression like we won't need experts and engineers. I don't believe that, but I don't think it's a strong hypothesis. I do think that as we bring AI into our systems, if we can think about it as a symbiotic AI kind of ecosystem perspective, you might be able to really leverage it for great competitive advantage, because you will have experts, but also explorers.
So question for you on this sort of like, hey, we can improve, like we learn from AI, but AI learns from us, right? And so therefore, and I, Adam, you always like the great analogy of around intelligence that human intelligence is collective, not individual. Like it's actually, and that if I was on, if you put me and a monkey on a desert island, which one of us would still be alive from a month from now, and it wouldn't be the human?
My money's on the monkey. That's right.
Yeah. So that's really what you're saying, is that our AI systems become part of our network of intelligence, and we become part of theirs. And I think that's really interesting. So maybe the idea is not that like these mindsets are as discrete as we've said, but maybe you have to hold all three mindsets at the same time. right? And you have to apply them differently, which I think is the model that you and I have talked about, which is like I still have to sometimes act like an expert. I have some expertise
Mm-hmm.
in my role, and by the way, my expertise might be the way I engage with AI. I might
Mm-hmm.
be really good at that, right? And so I think you need to have something that you can bring to the table. But I want to bring this back.
Just
Yes, Adam?
sorry, before you jump, but so about this notion of collective intelligence. I mean, the other thing is like the early days of AI. I think we work with caricatures of how expertise works in some sense. The early days of artificial intelligence was with the Dartmouth conference launched it in 1956, 57, I think. Basically, they approach human intelligence as just the things that happen between your ears, and
Right.
evidence
The
is very
brain,
strong. Yeah, the
basically the
brain. Like
brain.
if we just
Yeah.
reverse engineer, we'll have human intelligence, and
Yeah.
that's clearly just not true. So I think this notion of collective intelligence is actually really important. I think it would actually change even how we design AI in a very real way. But the reason that's relevant is because we can't measure collective intelligence. We're not good at measuring at the
Right.
scale whether something has made us more intelligent. And on another podcast, I actually made the argument that we should stop. Well, we explored a world in which we stop measuring intelligence at the individual level. Instead, what I measure is the intelligence that you have access to. And the reason I bring that up is, again, back to this caricature of expertise. If you look at how experts actually work, the best ones, they tap their networks all the time. Right? They reach out. Their cognition is clearly extended, even though in our paradigm we tend to focus on the individual. We give the Nobel Prize to a person, and
right.
which is sort of, I think, increasingly outdated and obsolete as a measure of what human intelligence / collective intelligence looks like. Okay.
So this goes to the concept of LQ being a cultural measure, right? It's really like because my individual learning quotient might measure how much of an explorer I am or how much of an explorer I could be. But that's actually not useful if I'm not connected to anything. I could have a very high individual LQ, but if within my organization we're extremely siloed, we don't work cross-functionally, then the organizational LQ is low because we don't have access to all the information that we could have. Right. And so I think that's it's almost like LQ is like a developmental thing for the individual, like where do I want to go? But LQ for the organization might actually be a really interesting cultural measure. So I think that's really interesting. I want to finish, and I just want to bring this back to leadership because I get the privilege to work with a lot of sort of senior leaders in large organizations, and when they look at AI, they're like, yeah, it can help our people become more effective, like more efficient, mostly, right? It's like an efficiency tool. Like we need fewer people to do the stuff, and as you've said, that may not end up playing out. But when I talk to them about how they leverage AI in the C-suite, they don't do it very much. Like they're not leveraging AI, and I think that they have this sense of I think they feel like they're experts. Like I got here because of what I brought to the table. I don't need to be able to talk to AI. But I think you said something that's really powerful. But if you unpack the way they work, they are reaching out to their board members. They're reaching out to colleagues in the industry. Like they're accessing other intelligences. How do you think we could get those senior leaders to think about AI as an asset that they could leverage to continue their development or continue and expand their thinking?
Yeah, it's interesting because even in the academic research area, we tend to build benchmarks, sort of how we measure artificial intelligence performance. We build benchmarks to some degree on problems we can solve, and we want to see how well the AI does there. From a perspective of collective intelligence, that's just the dumbest idea. Like I should not judge AI on how well it does in something I'm already an expert in, right?
Right.
It's more a question of like, what is this additional intelligence allow me to do? And that's what we don't have benchmarks for. Is am I now much better as a strategist because I'm using the AI in addition to other sources, right? And that speaks to my point is we need to help leaders sort of change those benchmarks, right? And get a better sense of, is this tool actually helping you make better decisions rather than is this tool making the same decisions you would make? I mean, that's not useful.
Oh, I love that. So yeah, so that's the explorer mentality, right? So
that's right.
So the issue is, I think, is that most of these leaders are engineers, right? They're not experts in that sense of like, I know the answer, but they're experts in the sense of like, I know how to get the answer, by running a strategy or building some processes that are cross. Like I think they're very much engineers, but they're not as open to exploration because they're not as open to being wrong.
Mm.
Right. And I think that like one of the reasons there's, it's interesting because I think, if you look at the research, one of the reasons why there's a challenge in getting AI adopted throughout an organization is because people feel like, they're going to get replaced, right? That they're going to, I don't think the C-suite feels like they're going to get replaced, but I think that they're not as open as maybe they need to be to have their assumptions challenged. Right? To be like, well, maybe the way I've thought about my industry, I've been really successful, but maybe the way I've thought about my industry is wrong or will be wrong or has been. Like, I feel like there's like having that vulnerability is something that might get in the way of them being able to leverage some of this really powerful tools to help them make, like you said, not the same decision, but to help them come up with better decisions.
Absolutely.
And I think I don't know how to overcome that. And maybe it's sort of like, hey, if you're in your 50s and you're in the C-suite, like, good luck to you. By the time it gets to, I don't know.
I don't know. I'm more optimistic. Although there is that concern of the thing that got you there is not going to get you there elsewhere, right?
That's and this is like, finally, I can link it back to the authentic leadership model, right? So the whole purpose of the authentic leadership model is the way that you led that got you into this new role is not the way you need to lead moving forward. And you have to be open to that willingness to be changed. You have to have an explorer mindset that says, I need to learn new things. I need to try new things. I need to do new things. And that comes with a risk. It's exactly the same thing here. You're absolutely right. So I'm glad that finally on the Leadership Shock podcast, I was able to link this back to the Leadership Shock book. Finally.
It only took us 50 minutes to get
That's
there
right. That's right.
But I think, this vulnerability thing, I think, there are a number of sort of classical characteristics or virtues that I think we need to really sort of reinstate. I've been thinking, Simon Sinek talks a lot about honor, for example, which I think is a really interesting thing, like bringing that back in. But I think the other is humility. In the Department of Defense, I've heard people, really good leaders say, they want people who are intellectually humble. Now, that does not mean intellectually meek. Right. Humility does not mean someone who's not, a wallflower, unwilling to. On the contrary, someone who's humble is exactly that. Is willing to say, I'm going to have to update. I'm going to have to change it. By the way, we see this even in things like forecasting. Right. That by which I mean crowdsourced forecasting. So you ask a lot of people what's going to happen. You average it. You tend to get a better forecast. But even in that group of forecasters, there are people who tend to be much better forecasters. And what we know from the research is expertise is a terrible predictor of forecasting, because in part, as you mentioned, that what I did, the way I think about the world, got me to being an expert. So therefore, it must be the answer. And in fact, the best forecasters are the ones who are much more willing to update. They're constantly tapping different signals, and I don't think they would necessarily call themselves experts in the space. I don't know if they call themselves explorers yet. That's our job, right? Is to help them see, like, in fact, you are explorers.
Yeah, I love that. Well, Adam, that's a great point. I love your optimism that people are going to be open to that explorer mindset. So a couple of things that I've taken away from this discussion is that the explorer mindset is really about this idea of learning, and you brought it up at the end, but this idea of humility, the collective intelligence, and having AI as part of your not a tool, but I always like to think about it as part of your team. Right, the AI is just another team member, right? So who brings a perspective, and a third thing is, and you've demonstrated this as someone who really has I want to be careful about how I term this, but really has done a lot of work in this area. Like, we don't know what the future brings, and we should be open to different ways of thinking and different ways of doing, and again, that comes back to the explorer mindset. Just a reminder to everyone that you can get Leadership Shock, even though this, and the authentic leadership model, and having an explorer mindset with your own leadership. You can have that. You can get that on Amazon, and the link is you'll find it in the notes. I want to thank Adam Russell for joining us and having, as always, a great discussion. Adam, thank you so much for spending time with us again today.
Pete, it was my pleasure once again to confuse the issues, but hopefully in the process make progress.
Okay, I love that. I love that. And just a reminder to everyone that this is part of the series Leadership Shock that you can that's now available and you can find on your favorite podcasting platform. And I hope you'll check us out again.